Hello, college football fans, and welcome to episode 144 of College Football Throwdown. I'm your co-host, Alex Schmitz, and today I'm joined in person by my dad, Peter Schmitz.
Oh, that hurt my back. Hi there, Husker fans and college football fans.
Yes, we're coming to you from St. Augustine, Florida in person today, and we have a special guest coming to us from the great up north of northern Michigan, Brian Klauer.
And a happy New Year to you two gentlemen. From the Great White North, which right now is ironically kind of green because it's been fairly mild here as well.
Yes.
Yeah, definitely. We know you guys got quite the storm right at Christmas, but it's already cleared up.
It pretty much has been. It's been pretty amazing. So we're starting the new year off a little bit more mild than usual, and looking forward to a successful and happy 23.
Great. Yep, so this is our first podcast of 2023, and we're coming to you on New Year's Day, so the day after the college football playoff semifinals. So we'll be talking about those, as well as the other bowl games that have already been played, and of course previewing the national championship game. So we'll have a lot to get into there. Brian has joined us in the past on podcasts. It's been a while, but he'll be able to bring a Michigan perspective to things, which should be interesting for our listeners.
Now, if we're going to have to talk about Michigan, I may have to sign off right now.
That might be a problem. But before we dive into all that, we're going to stick with our tradition and crack open some beverages. I've got Yuengling light lager here.
There you go. Yuengling is a beer you can't get back there in California. Yeah, and so that's good. I'm also drinking a special version of Yuengling. It's I think, Brian, you might appreciate this. This is Yuengling's Porter, made with Yuengling and Hershey's chocolate from Pennsylvania.
Oh, wow.
Yep. Yuengling is the oldest continuously producing brewery in America from Pottsville, Pennsylvania.
All right.
And an independent, Pete, or are they affiliated with any of the breweries?
No, I think they're independent. They're independent, yeah.
Okay. Well, here we go.
All righty. Here we go. Cheers.
Right.
Cheers, son.
Cheers.
Cheers, Brian.
Cheers, gentlemen.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. So to start things off, we'll talk about some of the other playoff games. You know, Dad and I on the last podcast predicted some of the bigger ones in terms of
bowl games.
Right. The win-losses and things of that nature. But one kind of point that has pervaded all of the bowl games and all of college football here in this postseason is this new situation with players sitting out for the NFL, you know, not wanting to potentially injure themselves, you know, in bowl games, and then also transferring to other teams before the bowl game. So we've seen a lot of teams play without some of their key talent, and so it's kind of like you're seeing, not necessarily seeing a representation of what they were capable of in the regular season.
Right.
Yeah, and it's pretty amazing.
And actually, the opting out has been going on for a few years now. Pretty much since the college football playoff has begun, where the central focus on those playoff games has diminished effectively every other bowl game. And so players are making, you know, the career choice, really, that it's in their best interest to, opt out of that bowl game and the risk of injury in exchange for getting a head start on their preparations for the draft. Now, though, this year is really the first major year in which the portal transfer situation, enhanced by the COVID extra year still being a factor in all this, that has just created a flood of additional players opting not to participate in the bowl game because of the transfer portal implication.
It's the Wild West, guys. What can you say? Reflecting back a little bit, when we first started having star players opting out, I was sharing with Pete, Alex, that Jabril Peppers chose one year to opt out essentially by saying he had a hamstring injury. Now, he may well have, but it was ironic that he developed a hamstring situation during warm-ups of a bowl game that didn't mean much to us. And I think at that point in time, the clear opt out, the obvious blatant opt out, was not something that they were doing. They were having to use maybe an injury or something of that nature to excuse themselves. Now it's just accepted. In fact, I think it's even encouraged by teammates. There was a case in which one of our teammates encouraged one of his other teammates on the team to opt out of this game because he was a little dinged up and wanted him to make money in the pros. So you can see the logic, but it's just a frustration.
Well, and I can understand it to some extent with a non-playoff bowl game, but for you guys, I mean, you're playing for the chance to be national champions.
Right.
So even if you are a little dinged up, it feels like you'd want to contribute to that effort.
You'd think so, but I think in many cases the team atmosphere, the team investment is lessened, has been lessened. And again, one of the things we've talked about extensively is the fact that maybe these kids are taking care of number one. And in some ways, sports in general, whether it's the coaching staff, the program itself, the brand, it all seems like they're all generating their own focus on their own individual well-being or money. And that's a balancing act we're trying to sort through.
That's definitely true. Another interesting thing, we read a Sports Illustrated article that had a little talk with the head executive of Bowl Season, which is an organization that controls the majority of the bowl games, or helps
with logistics and
oversee them,
relationships and contracts, all that stuff.
Yeah. And so basically he was saying that it comes springtime, he's planning to talk with the commissioners of all the conferences to kind of decide what the bowls are going to be in this upcoming era of the 12-team playoff, because we only have one more year now of the 4-team playoff before things really change. And some of the talking points that are expected to be considered are increasing the minimum to 6-6 instead of 5-7, giving NIL payments to players to entice them to go, shifting the games up a week in the schedule, changing up conference affiliations, things of that nature. So, with an expanded playoff, the bowls become even less relevant than they currently are because more teams are part of the actual fight for number one. So it'll be interesting to see, what maybe some of the minor bowls, just going away entirely. And then the bigger ones, sticking around. We know that the major six, the New Year's Six, are going to be part of the rotation of the 12-team playoff in terms of like the quarterfinals and the semifinals to get to that national championship game.
And that's an interesting point. The concern that I have is the tradition of the bowls are very different than what they were in the past or will be in the future. And they'll be venues rather than kind of a traditional event. And I think that's something that I'm going to miss. I've talked extensively about that with Pete. The Rose Bowl has always been, the Big Ten, Pac-10 or Pac-12 connection. And it's something that I grew up with and cherished. And clearly that will become a rotating venue for a certain matchup of some degree of competition based on the championship format, but no longer something that is Big Ten, Pac-12 unique, and also carries that championship of the Rose Bowl. It'll no longer be a championship site unless it happens to be the one that falls that year on. So times are changing.
Well, and so, for example, since that is one of those New Year's Day 6, the question becomes, is there ever going to be just a Rose Bowl again, right? Like
exactly.
Now there are years when this is not in the rotation of the semifinals or the finals, and you have for lack of a better term, more of a traditional Rose Bowl, right?
Like this year.
Like this year, right. That's not necessarily going to happen, I don't think, going forward. Because it's going to be a part of the playoffs every year. So maybe they are still going to have it. I really don't know the answer to that.
They may call it that, but I think it's going to be more of a venue-based situation rather than some kind of an affiliated Rose Bowl championship, let's say.
Right. Yeah. Because now with the 12-team playoff, the champion of the Big Ten and the Pac-12 are guaranteed to be in the playoff. and even the second best teams from both conferences may be in the playoff. So then you'd be playing the third best from both sides, and maybe you can still do that, but it certainly loses a lot of the prestige it used to have.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see how all of those changes and all the dialogue, like was interesting to me about this article, was an acknowledgement that they recognize that the status quo won't work in this new NIL era. So now, to entice players to keep them from opting out, they're going to likely have some form of compensation of NIL money that is associated with the teams that are invited to their particular bowl game. So those bowl games now might very well have to be forced, really, to either get more sponsorship or reallocate some of their existing sponsorship for the purposes of paying NIL dollars to all the participants.
That is interesting. That brings up two thoughts. First of all, I want to backtrack a bit back to the Rose Bowl last year and just finish my thought with the idea of it being a lesser event now. Ohio State, which had recently lost to Michigan in that game, they were then the Rose Bowl representatives for the Big Ten. They clearly were unhappy with that placement, and they ended up winning against Utah, but nevertheless did say this was not our goal. And so that in itself kind of it exposed to me that the Rose Bowl had lost, the emphasis and the focus that it once had carried, which is unfortunate. But relative to the point you just made, Pete, with the NIL payments, perhaps for players staying in the action, it's unfortunate that you've paid these, or you've essentially compensated these players for at least 3 years, perhaps maybe 4 or 5, some cases now even 6, through all of the scholarship money for education and all of the supplemental things that go with being a collegiate athlete, amateur athlete. And at the same time, not having any loyalty for them to play that final game without some kind of compensation. That's just kind of ironic.
Yep, it's a sad state compared to the old days where it was more about the prestige of the bowl and being able to travel with your team to some cool location, get a cool, unique experience. That in itself was kind of the reward.
It was, yeah.
But now with more and more money coming into college football and that becoming more emphasized, and like we said, the more selfish, focused on me, not the team kind of attitudes, we're kind of seeing that fade away more.
Well, and the reality is, if you're not playing in a bowl game or in one of these games, because you're wanting to prepare for the NFL because you believe you have an opportunity to play in the NFL, the reality is, how much would they have to pay you, right, for you to risk your career through an injury situation? How would you do that, right? So I don't know that throwing $5,000 at a player is necessarily going to motivate them to change their mind about participation in a bowl game. You know what I mean? Like the magnitude of money that would be required it would have to be life-changing money, and they're not going to do that. They can't do that.
Well, an injury could dictate a very different spot on your draft.
Right.
You might be a first day draft choice bumped down to 3 or 4, if anything.
I was going to say, the only thing that NIL would do in terms of NIL compensation during bowl games is probably motivate some players to wait until after their bowl game before they announce they're going into the portal.
Yeah.
It would delay their entry into the portal.
Right. Very true, very true. Now, getting on to the bowl games, obviously there are a ton of bowl games over the past few weeks, and we're only be focusing on kind of the major ones or the ones that were interesting in terms of the result. So one that was earlier on was the Las Vegas Bowl with Oregon State crushing Florida 30-3. And we had Air Force beating Baylor in the Armed Forces Bowl 30-15. So 2 upsets.
2 upsets, and really 2 prime examples of bowl games matching a team that wanted to be there against a team that didn't want to be there. Mm-hmm. In the case of Oregon State, to play in a bowl game and to have had the positive season that they've had, they were giddy. Their fans were excited. there was so much energy for them, and they played like it, right? And I think similarly, the Air Force was very happy to be in a bowl game, right? Versus who was
Baylor.
that team?
Baylor.
Yep.
Yeah, who came into the season, I believe, preseason top 10 ranked and expected to compete and possibly win the Big 12.
Coming off last year, I think they were definitely at high expectations. And Air Force just did what they always do, just grind on them and play smart football. And like I said, Pete, I don't think Baylor was that interested in being there. They probably had a great time with the bowl experience and then did a walkthrough that day.
Exactly. Yep. And so that's what's so critical whenever we are doing the prediction show earlier a couple weeks ago on all these bowl games. That's the hardest thing to really decipher, and it's what always made any of those bowl challenges. I think you used to participate with me a few times when we regularly did a bowl challenge, and that was the reason it was hard to pick the winner, and it's even more difficult today because so many of these teams, you just have to really question where are they going to draw their motivation from.
Well, I'd heard that Pitt had 9 players that opted out of their bowl game, and ironically, they ended up winning their bowl game. So it doesn't always, hold true. But as you're saying, if you have 5, 6, 7 players out, and typically those are players that are, number one, either transferring or opting to go, in the NFL, and they're guarding themselves, those are critical players. Those are team making, game making difference players that are now missing. So and your depth is compromised. So it's a different thing. It would be difficult to be a coach under those circumstances.
Definitely, I totally agree with that. In terms of a bowl game that we did predict, there's the Guaranteed Rate Bowl, which was Wisconsin and Oklahoma State. I predicted that Wisconsin would win it, while Dad predicted that Oklahoma State would win it. Ended up being a Wisconsin victory of 24-17, bit lower scoring. And I think your reasoning was that, Wisconsin had the new coach coming in with Luke Fickell and Jim Leonard sticking around as defensive coordinator, so we weren't sure how that kind of chaos would manifest itself in the game. But then we learned that Oklahoma State had their own fair share of players not being available for the game, and so they had their own problems to deal with.
Right, and they had a bunch of turnover in coaches after this season. They their head coach replaced like 4 or 5 assistants, and so they had a bunch of new assistants that were playing in that game, or for the first time.
Did Fickell coach that game?
Fickell was he was the guy on the sidelines, but I think for the most part, the game plan, all that was still done by the previous guy, Jim Leonard, who was the interim head coach and was the defensive coordinator for sure. But I don't know that like Fickell wasn't calling plays or anything. I think he just was kind of on the sidelines and stuff.
No, I've not kept up because it's changed a couple times. Has Leonard opted to stay or leave? Because I know he's gone back and forth at least once.
Right.
Twice.
He's leaving, but he decided to stay and stick with his team until this bowl game was over. Right.
Gotcha.
Yep. So good for Wisconsin. I know Dad was torn because on the one hand, it's good for the Big Ten for them to win these bowl games. On the other hand, anything good happening to our rivals is bad. So
right.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I really am. I'm at a point where it is hard for me to be happy with anybody else having success. Because I've realized, and we talked a little bit about this previously, to a large degree in football, and particularly within your conference, it's a zero-sum game. There's only so many games that are conference games, and somebody has to win one and somebody has to lose it. There aren't ties. So guess what? If your rival is winning, that's not good for you. It's not good on any level, even though somehow the SEC has been able to create this whole SEC moniker thing, and that's mostly because everybody, I think, fell victim to basically acknowledging that for about a decade, Alabama was going to win the SEC every year anyway. So it was no longer about who's going to win the league. It was now about let's ride the coattails of Alabama's success and let's be prideful of our collective success. And I don't think we have that in the Big Ten. I don't think any other conference other than the SEC has that.
Yeah.
Because we still hold our rivalries pretty staunchly.
Well, to that point, we were at a bar watching some of the games, eating some food here in Florida, and there was a guy next to us who was cheering for one of the teams, and I asked him, I think it was or maybe it was the South Carolina game against Notre Dame.
Oh, okay.
It was one of those two. But basically, I was like, which team are you rooting for? And he's like, I'm an SEC fan, so I'm rooting for the SEC.
Right.
That's guy.
That was during the Notre Dame.
South Carolina.
Yeah, South Carolina game, and he was just sitting at the bar, and he was not a South Carolina fan, but he was rooting for him because they're SEC. and I don't see Big Ten fans doing that. I don't see you rooting for Ohio State. And maybe you might root for Nebraska because we really aren't a threat, and you have a friend who's a Nebraska fan, right? But that's if it wasn't for that, you wouldn't give a shit. In fact, you'd probably prefer that Nebraska continue to be bad, because if all of a sudden we emerged as a talent, as a real threat, guess what? You ain't rooting for our success.
I would root for the Big Ten during bowl games in the past because I thought it was representative of our conference successes in its ranking, so to speak, in the hierarchy of all the Power Five, other than rooting, of course, for Ohio State, which I never do. I'd even root for Michigan State on rare occasions, but it would have to be against an opponent I disliked even more. But I do think that has dwindled. I think you're exactly right, Pete. You don't want anyone making hay during any time of the year, because that can take you down a notch or grab some power or strength or players perhaps away from you. Yep.
And on that point, in the Pinstripe Bowl, we had Minnesota versus Syracuse, and Minnesota won 28-20. That game was of some interest to Dan and I because our new defensive coordinator was at Syracuse before, so we got to see kind of how they run that particular system. And that was a game where Minnesota's defense got some points for them, basically. So Syracuse's defense didn't perform badly, but on the offense, Syracuse struggled. And Minnesota did what they always do and just played solid football and managed to kind of beat a more talented opponent.
And that oftentimes is the case in a bowl game where those teams, especially if they're lacking players, will just muddy things up and just grind on you. And that's what I expected yesterday with the two semifinal games, and was clearly wrong.
Right.
Yep.
Yeah. And that's we're going to get to that very shortly here. And the bottom line is, I don't think either of those final semifinals games went like we thought they were going to.
No.
Exactly.
Well, actually, yeah. Well, we'll get to it. We'll get to that. And then this was a crazy one: Kansas versus Arkansas in the Liberty Bowl. Kansas was losing 38-13 in the third quarter, and Dad and I actually switched to something else, just stopped watching the game because it was so obvious that Arkansas was going to win and the SEC was going to dominate. But then Kansas started to get some momentum going, and then late in the fourth quarter, Arkansas had a fumble with 3 minutes to go. So Kansas drives it down, scores a touchdown, then gets a great onside kick where Arkansas, frankly, didn't do anything to try to get it. And then they score again to tie up the game. It goes into overtime, ends up going to triple overtime, and Kansas only loses because they mess up on the 2-point conversion that's required in triple overtime. So it turned out to be quite a game.
That was a great game. Great finish.
Yes.
Great finish, yeah.
Yeah.
And I would say that about a number of games. A lot of these games, even that Minnesota-Syracuse game, it was hard to watch that game. I mean, neither one of those teams played well, right? It was not clean football. It was very ugly football. But yet it was interesting because it was in doubt until the last, minute or two of the game, right? And same with that Kansas game. That Kansas game was atrociously played, but yet interesting because of the end.
Mm-hmm. Yep. We made a note of that, partially because of all these transfers and stuff, right? It's some messy football, and they haven't been in practice as regularly. They have this kind of break for the holidays and stuff. So it's entertaining football, even if it's not clean football, so to speak. Two other games of interest are Oklahoma versus Florida State in the Cheez-It Bowl, which ended up being a Florida State victory 35-32, and the Alamo Bowl with Washington beating Texas 27-20.
Yes!
Yes, Dad was happy about that one. We kept on examining that Washington quarterback's throwing motion. He's a left-handed quarterback and has a very strange motion, very compact. He doesn't follow through in a traditional sense. He's clearly got a really strong arm, but he was missing the deep ball like a dozen times in that game.
But there was also something really other unique about that. Okay, so let's see here. Washington was that guy was throwing the ball, and his receivers were making spectacular catches on his behalf. Right? I mean, they were making him look good. And this guy, it's Penix. It's the guy from Indiana.
Sure.
Right.
Yep. He's coming back, by the way.
Michael Penix. Yeah, he's coming back for Washington. He's got another year,
which is astonishing.
Yeah, I know.
Come back yet another year.
I know. You're right. but anyway, his receivers just making these catches at the ground. Just up high. I mean, just incredible catches, making him look great. And then the opposing quarterback was like, the Texas quarterback. I mean, he's throwing the ball and it's landing in the breadbasket of this, wide receiver who's open, and he drops it. And it just happened like 4 times. And we had to comment that, God, I have a feeling that Ewers guy is like, shit, I'll trade wide receivers with you any day of the week there, Michael Penix, because
that makes a difference.
It does.
You guys can catch the ball. You were mentioning, Alex, this guy's delivery. I'm watching the game yesterday with the transfer from it was the Tennessee game. He's the new quarterback, Milton,
right?
Who stepped in as a starter yesterday for Tennessee. Same thing, 6'5", and he throws the ball at about a 4-foot level. Like he's sidearming it.
Right.
And I'm thinking, do these guys just come with these bad habits and they're not coached to change them, and it's allowed because it clearly isn't the most effective throwing motion. And the kid's got a cannon for an arm, but I don't know how far he can go with it if he's going to sling it that way.
Right. And I suspect there's more than one quarterback coach that has tried to change his throwing motion, but then they abandon it at some point because at some point they're looking at the whole package and saying, I want to just get that athlete on the field. And if that's the way he's comfortable throwing it, I tried to change it. It did not lead to a positive result. I mean, it just would take so long to get somebody to truly change the habit, right? Or they do it for the first quarter, and then as the game goes on, it deteriorates and they go back to their old way.
Yeah.
I predicted that Florida State would win in that Oklahoma game, so I get the point there because you picked Oklahoma. But we both.
What is the tally right now, Alex?
Well, we both predicted Washington would beat Texas. Okay. So I'm up by 2 currently in our predictions.
Yes.
But that won't last for long. Speaking of that game you were just talking about, Brian, that was the Orange Bowl, Tennessee-Clemson. I really thought that was going to be one of the best bowl games we had. They seem like pretty evenly matched teams. They're both orange, which was funny. Clemson had just started this new young quarterback in the conference championship game, and he played really well. And the other guy, the starter for the whole season, had left and transferred to Oregon State. And so it seemed like Clemson had kind of got it figured out. But then they just made so many mistakes in that game. They out-yarded Tennessee significantly and in time of possession and everything. But they just couldn't get the scores going, and they had a terrible end of the first half where they just ran out of time and didn't get any points when they could have gotten a field goal. So it was a real frustrating day if you were a Clemson fan.
Yeah, I can relate.
Well,
very similar game.
And so can we. We had a whole season of it, i.e. 2021, where Scott Frost found so many different ways to beat a team in every statistical category except the scoreboard.
Yeah, and that's the one that counts.
That's right.
Yep. So I predicted that Clemson would win 31-24. Dad predicted that Tennessee would win 45-31, and that being 31-14 Tennessee victory. So Dad gets the nod there.
Well, Tennessee's a scary team. I was telling your dad, Alex, that Tennessee's a team that makes me nervous. I think they've got a really progressive coach. He's got a very different philosophy than most of the SEC schools. He doesn't mind putting up points and trying to have a shootout, and it might be successful with the talent he's got there and his recruiting ability. So Tennessee's a scary team in the future, I think.
Well, and I suppose one thing I didn't factor into my prediction was that unlike a lot of these other SEC schools, Tennessee was happy to be there because they've had a good season this year. Even though they kind of had some disappointing losses near the end, this season still went a lot better than they thought it would. They beat Alabama, so they aren't in the same position as some of those other ones.
That's true.
And then we had the Alabama-Kansas State game. For some reason, I went with my heart and said that Kansas State was going to win that one. While Dad was the realist and said that Alabama would win 35-21. Ended up being 45-20, so kind of a drumming on Alabama's part. But Kansas State did get out to an early lead of 10-0, and they were clearly going for the win. They were willing to take risks, not settle for field goals, to try to go for touchdowns. It just didn't work out for them.
That's right.
Clearly overmatched. And you look at the Alabama team and you think to yourself, man, that's a Final Four team.
Right. As you watch them play. They played clean and solid in all phases.
Just dominating. Yeah, just a dominating team.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
Saban's ready to launch into a new year. I guarantee you they'll be furious next year and will give us all trouble.
We're not talking about recruiting on this podcast, but their season is looking just fine in terms of
it's crazy.
Recruiting.
Yeah.
Yep.
So Saban is bouncing back fine there, and to his credit, the team came focused, ready to play. They woke up after Kansas State went up early, and Bryce Young started playing better. So they didn't sleepwalk like I was fearing they would, or hoping they would.
That's an exception to what we've been discussing. They had no business being motivated to do well, and that may have been why they started slow. But clearly, their talent was so superior. They said, "Yeah, we can just march through these guys." And it was a clear win.
And we didn't predict this one, but Iowa beat Kentucky 21-0 with 2 pick sixes in one of the most Iowa games you've ever heard of.
Oh my gosh, what a team! Huh?
Well, and Kentucky, they. Nebraska.
That's a pretty good team.
Exactly. And Nebraska and other teams were courting their coach. He was in the mix with a lot of jobs. There was all this recognition about, what he's done there at Kentucky. They have some real talent there. So, I fully expected them to do well, especially since we beat Iowa. And
Kentucky's been competitive with the SEC big boys all season long and played close games with all those lead SEC schools. So they were definitely a very good team, a very good program. But Iowa just does their Iowa thing.
Well, that's the thing is that, their corners, Iowa's corners they were feasting on that Kentucky quarterback the whole day. And 2 of them obviously were pick sixes, but there were others too where they dang near got a pick. And I think he just got to where he was so gun shy, and their whole system fell apart.
And again, I can relate.
Well, speaking of, we have the Fiesta Bowl, where we both predicted that Michigan would win. I predicted a closer score of 28-17, while Dad went for the blowout of 48-24. And the final score ended up being high-scoring 51-45 with TCU upsetting Michigan. Sorry, Brian.
Hey, it's a New Year's Eve tradition.
Yeah.
6 in a row, 6 bowl games lost in a row.
Well, yeah, I saw that stat this morning that he's lost 6 straight bowls by a average margin of 13.7 points.
Man.
We got to remember, though, Jim Harbaugh is a disciple of Bo Schembechler. And if you look at Bo's bowl record, very similar. So I think Harbaugh's just patterning himself after his mentor.
Well, so I'm going to jump right in on this game, okay? And I'm going to say, I did expect Michigan to win. I thought Michigan was not just the superior team, but I thought there was a significant difference. If you look at both the record and how that record was achieved of TCU and Michigan, you see dramatically different seasons. You see a TCU team that had to come from behind 7 times for victories during the season. They were a team that was constantly under duress, not ever, cruising, so to speak, smooth, beating people. Michigan, on the other hand, was a team that, for the most part, in many of their games, once you got somewhere into the third quarter, they were pretty much controlling the game. And they were doing that by use of their offensive line, and then, enough success passing the football to keep the Lions from, loading everybody in the box, right? And you had the players and specifically the offensive line to do that. Well, and so you guys just weren't stressed that many times. Illinois stressed you a bit, and
we trailed Ohio State.
Yeah, you trailed Ohio State. Yep. And I feel like there was one other game earlier in the season that you maybe, it was tenuous. Maybe it was Iowa, because you just never know with Iowa, right? But then eventually you pulled away. But other than that, I mean, when you played us, it was a 30-3 game. There was never really any doubt who was going to win, that sort of stuff. So I just was convinced that if you just do what you've been doing, and Harbaugh had shown we talked about it, Brian, you and I had a number of times about how Harbaugh had been very patient with his running game. Even when maybe he initially, in, say, the first quarter or whatever, wasn't having a lot of success, he stayed with it. He stayed with what was working, what had been working, and they were just very disciplined. And then they get in this game against TCU, and they throw all that out, it seemed to me. I mean, the play calling was just head-scratching to me the whole time. And then defensively, it was like they had never seen 4 wide receivers before.
Yeah, they went against everything that we were used to seeing the entire year. And your point to start, Pete, was an excellent one. I think that TCU was raised this year on challenges and come from behinds and stress and, just things not always going their way and finding a way to win. It was so unusual for us to be in a situation where it wasn't coming easily for us and we weren't rolling over someone, especially in the second half. I think that it was a case that we couldn't respond as well as we should have. That said, I think it was all set up by the fact that they didn't run the ball. They started, I think they had too much time to plan. They got too cute.
Right.
And the bottom line is they went away from everything that they had success with this year and let TCU dictate the game. We played a Big 12 game yesterday.
Yep.
And it was a shootout. And if we'd had more time, maybe we'd have caught them. But we might never have caught them because they kept scoring every time we'd score. And that's not how not how we're going to win.
Right. If you look at third down and fourth down efficiency, they were 8 of 16, 50%.
Right.
Pretty good for third down. You guys were 3 of 15.
Unbelievable.
Well, right. If you combine fourth downs and the third downs, because you were 0-2 on the fourth downs, which one of which was particularly infamous.
That's
devastating. Yeah.
Yeah. And Dad and I agreed that going for it on fourth down on that situation on the first drive of the game, when you're on like the 2-yard line, made sense to do in a championship setting.
Absolutely.
But you just chose the weirdest trick play in the world to try.
I just couldn't believe it.
Yeah, not only a trick play, but a very long developing trick play with a freshman backup tight end as your now throwing player.
Right.
On the sweep. Crazy call. And the poor kid didn't have even the presence of mind to throw the ball away, which would have at least preserved the position of the ball at about the 2 or 1 or 2 yard line.
Right.
He ended up getting sacked at the 7 or 9 or whatever it was. It's like nothing good came from that.
That's right.
And the worst case scenario would have been just line up one of the big boys and let them rumble it in.
Yeah. Well, and what was probably the most surprising to me, because I was definitely more believing in TCU than Dad was. I didn't think it was going to be a blowout. I thought it'd be a close game, but that Michigan would win. And when Michigan on the first play gets like a 70-yard run, right through the middle of the TCU line, I thought, oh man, this could be a blowout. They're going to run all over the place. But after that play, TCU really got it together in terms of rush defense. That was clearly their game plan going in, was to try to stop the rush. And Michigan only had 186 total rushing yards.
Well, and if you take that 60-yard run away on that first play, you're down to 126. And then you recognize that out of those 126, half of those were from your quarterback in basically runs or scramble situations. Yeah. So
you take away the big run by the quarterback and the initial run by our halfback, we probably got 80 yards rushing. 70 or 80.
Crazy.
Yeah. Now, I should have asked this earlier, Brian, but what was your initial impression going into the game? Were you confident that Michigan would win, or were you concerned?
I was quite confident, but I'm always concerned because we don't do well in bowls, number one. And I think that you guys kind of alluded to moving up the bowl schedule a bit tighter to the end of the season. I think for Michigan, and I think for some of the lead teams, it's more problematic to have those almost 4 weeks of downtime because I think just too many things happen. They lose their tendencies. Maybe they get a little rusty. Maybe they start scheming things that, oh, we should have tried that during the year. Let's plug this in now in the bowl game. And I think because we felt we were definitely the better team, Harbaugh was willing to maybe take a little bit more risks here and there because he figured we could respond from it. Since we were probably the better team, it blew up in our face, and we turned out not to be the better team.
Right. Well, I think it was because you guys almost came back even after all the mistakes. It was clear that you were the more talented team, the better overall team, but you didn't play as well in the day because there were the 2 pick sixes, the fumble on first and a goal at the 1 yard line that was very critical. So some devastating mistakes that just seemed to keep piling on. But then in the second half, Michigan started making more of the comeback. The quarterback started playing more consistently. TCU had their own fair share of turnovers and ended up being 3-3 on turnovers. So it was even over the course of the game. And TCU also let some huge plays go by. But then it seemed like as soon as that happened, Michigan would be on defense, and then they'd give up a huge play to TCU. So, like you say, it was a shootout.
Well, and that's where that's where them playing. It wasn't just the offense playing unusually. I thought your defensive coordinator, for whatever reason, called a game plan that was more intimidated by TCU's spread attack than he had been all year against some other teams that he had faced that also had some very talented wide receivers, i.e. Ohio State, where you went zero coverage. I mean, they went zero coverage. And so then you have one slip, you have one guy miss a tackle or take a wrong angle, and it's to the house. And that happened, including at a critical point in the second half when you guys were mounting your comeback, and then they just put a knife in it because they throw the ball to on a short route, really. And the guy ends up breaking one tackle, and boom, he's gone 60 yards or whatever it was for a touchdown.
Yeah, Mentor called a hyper-aggressive game, and I don't know exactly why he did that because, like you said, Pete, Maryland, Ohio State, Purdue, all had significant passing games, and we just sat back and bent, not broke, bend, don't break. And we also had injured the running back for TCU. Right. So their ground game was definitely, it was just kind of muddied up. And sure enough, we could have backed off some and probably avoided some of the big scores and had a better chance at making, the gains and making the score a little closer or coming back completely. Right. But we just could never get that stop.
After having all this conversation, I will say this. At the end of the day, you don't win a game in which you throw 2 pick sixes. So part of it is not only did you had the same number of turnovers, but the Michigan turnovers translated immediately to 2 scores for TCU and eliminating a score for you. I mean, because you're right on the goal line on the other turnover, right? So the reality is those 3 turnovers represented 24 points or 21 points in favor of TCU.
Yeah, clearly those 21 points would have made it a rout on our behalf.
Absolutely.
And you can argue that the one play that we fumbled on the goal line should not have been even presented to us because we should have gotten the score.
Well, right.
But either way, you fumble at the goal line and you can't do those kind of things. So the 2 pick sixes, the fumble on the goal line, 21 points.
Yep.
We essentially let them swing it. That's over. You can't overcome that.
Nope.
It's not very often.
Yep. And
we almost did.
I know.
Right. Well, yeah. There were some, kind of questionable calls on both sides. I think it was an SEC refereeing crew, and because TCU had some calls called on them that I thought were kind of baloney.
Yeah.
And then there was the targeting call at the very end of the game that was not called, which would have given you another.
That did look like targeting to me. That did look like targeting.
Wow.
To me. No.
Are you serious?
No, you don't think so?
Oh my God, I absolutely believe it was targeting. There's no doubt in my mind it was.
Yeah. But no, I'm saying I did think it was targeting. I thought it was targeting.
You thought it was. Okay. Yeah. I 100% believe that you guys should have gotten one more snap. They should have moved the ball 15 yards, and you should have gotten one more snap. It would have been a Hail Mary. It doesn't mean you would have win the game or anything. But what frustrates me about that is the absolute abject inconsistency throughout college football of how
with
that
targeting
how that call is applied, how that call is reviewed, because that call was called from the booth. It was buzzed down because there was no flag on the actual play. It was buzzed down from the booth. So the booth guy saw it and he said, "Hey, let's take a look at this." But then after he reviewed it, he said it wasn't targeting. And yet, to me, if you read the rule book, you need to have one of three elements, not all three, but any one of these three, and it's targeting. And helmet-to-helmet contact is absolutely on that list. Now, I've seen all kinds of targeting calls that were called all season long where an offensive player lowers his head to engage in contact with a defensive player, and they call that targeting. And to me, that is football, right?
Yeah.
Whereas this play, where you got a guy whose back is to the oncoming defender, the defender flies in there with his helmet down like a spear, right? We used to call that spearing back when we played.
Helmet on helmet.
Yeah, and there was helmet on helmet contact. I don't know how you don't call that, targeting.
That was such a sloppy end of that game.
Yes,
and that was the punctuation mark.
Indicative,
on the ending. But I don't even know what happened to that play with the early snap and stuff.
Yeah.
But ironically, had we gotten the targeting call on the 15 yards, I think we would have been somewhere around midfield, maybe even slightly into the Ohio State. I'm sorry, I'm still thinking Ohio State, TCU territory. And I think there were still 20 seconds or so left.
Mm-hmm.
So there might have been more than one play.
A Hail Mary. You're right. You're exactly right.
Right.
To me, that
So
it is what it is.
Disappointing.
But I hate the way that particular call gets applied so inconsistently.
Right. It sort of reminds me in F1, which I've somewhat gotten into last year, there was a big controversy where in the very last race of the year where the two top people were tied in terms of points. So basically whoever wins this race wins the overall season. And there was basically, they interpreted the rules a bit differently and didn't want to let it end under a yellow flag because it was the end of the championship, right? So kind of because of the circumstance, they said, okay, we're going to go back to regular racing for the last lap, and that disadvantaged the guy currently in first.
Right.
And so, it was a big controversy, and this felt a little bit similar in that because it was the last play of the game and it was this confusing, chaotic thing, and it would have been a huge momentum swing, the refs kind of backed off.
Right. They
just and with SEC refs, just saying.
Exactly.
But last point I'll make is that I do want to give credit to Sonny Dykes at TCU. He and his staff clearly came with a good game plan. Their players were there to play. They were not looking ahead to the next game. They were here to beat Michigan. And to put some context on their success, in the Big 12 preseason poll, it had Baylor number 1, Oklahoma number 2, TCU 7th within the Big 12, to give you an idea of how far they've come.
Right.
Complete flip-flop there.
And Sonny, he comes from the Mike Leach coaching tree, with given Mike's recent departure, rest in peace, may he rest in peace. That is, I think, an awesome thing. But I think he's going to do very well at TCU in the new Big 12. I think TCU's positioned themselves quite nicely and will do very well. And I would say well, you know what? I'm going to just move on.
Well, I'll finish up that thought, though, Pete, because I got to say one thing about his quarterback.
Okay.
Duggan, he inherited Duggan, and I tell you what, that kid is scrappy.
Mm-hmm.
There's a reason he's a finalist for the Heisman, because he just makes stuff happen. There were a couple times we had him in our grasp, and he slung the thing in a very awkward way to a receiver, and it busted into a big play. The kid's really got a great game savviness to him, so it was fun to watch.
Yeah.
Yep, and he's the second Heisman Trophy finalist that Scott Frost easily could have gotten to Nebraska. That he just
you guys have a record of that, don't you?
We really do.
Yeah. You might hold the record for that.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, between Max
there's a kid named Burrows.
And
a kid named Burrows somewhere didn't get didn't get to you guys either.
Exactly.
So
It's ridiculous. And here's the reality that's current. We had four quarterbacks, okay, within our 500-mile radius, all of whom had a connection to Nebraska. Either they were from Nebraska, or they're from South Dakota, or in some other way had a tie to Nebraska. We could have gotten any of them. We didn't get any of them this year. In this year's senior class, the 2023 recruiting class, and we have no freshman or incoming scholarship quarterback in our recruiting class. Because
do you think, though, that's because of the fact you've got a good starting quarterback and they knew it?
No, I think it's completely because we didn't even offer Keinholz, who is the kid that just recently switched commitments from Washington to Ohio State. Okay, and he was a 4-star athlete from South Dakota, right across the border. His cousins are all Nebraska fans. Most of his family is in Nebraska. He wanted to go to Nebraska. We did not offer him a scholarship. He's a 4-star. We had another guy by the name of Flores, who is from the state of Nebraska, and he's going to Oklahoma State. He signed with Oklahoma State. We never offered him a scholarship.
Well, it is disappointing when you can't get your homegrown kids or kids within your zone.
We didn't even try.
You've got a good starting quarterback now, and you picked up a real nice portal player too.
Right.
So,
but it shows you how just unorganized and just incompetent it turns out our previous coach was. And it's crazy how you don't learn that stuff until the guy is gone, and then you begin to realize, okay, he was pulling these strings and making these decisions that seemed counterproductive. It's like he was almost self-destructing.
My final point with Duggan is too, I'll be curious to see how TCU does when this kid's gone.
Right.
Because I'm telling you, some of these quarterbacks are difference makers, and he clearly is one of them.
That's why they won 7 games coming from behind.
Yep.
Yeah. Well, and why they went in overtime in the Big 12 championship game.
Right.
Exactly.
That
he
one
carried
drive.
that all.
Yeah. He put it
incredible
all on his back.
It was.
All right. So then there's the Ohio State-Georgia game.
Yes.
Dad and I both predicted that Georgia would win. I said 38-28. You said 42-28. Ended up being a much closer game of 42-41, where Ohio State was leading for the majority of the game and had the chance to win it at the end, which would have been Brian's nightmare, I know.
Right.
It would have definitely been phase 2 of my nightmare. Yes.
You know what? I'm going to add to your nightmare. The reality is you still almost beat TCU, right?
Exactly.
And after watching Ohio State almost beat Georgia, you could at least see, hey, they're vulnerable. They're a team that is beatable, right?
Well,
and
twice now.
Had you guys beaten TCU, you would have looked at that next game at least with some optimism and say, hey, this team is beatable.
This is not the Georgia of last year.
Exactly. Yeah.
And if you recall, the previous game that Georgia played against their SEC opponent, who would they play? Was it South Carolina or someone? Who do they play in their championship game?
Conference championship? I feel
it was LSU.
LSU, that's right. And LSU, even though they lost the game fairly convincingly, LSU scored in droves on them.
Yes.
And I thought, wow, okay, was it just a letdown or what? But clearly, they don't have the defense this year that they had last year.
And especially,
still very good.
Ohio State, there were portions of the game last night where Ohio State was just playing pitch and catch. They were throwing the ball, and their drives were 4 plays, and each one of them was 20 yards down the middle of the field. Their receivers.
Well, when the quarterback, the quarterback for Georgia, Stetson Bennett, said, hey, I think we scored too early with, 50 seconds left to go in the game, that's kind of indicative of the fact that he knew, and they all knew, their defense was not holding Ohio State.
And again, frankly, they were right. Okay, and Ohio State had everything go their way. I talked with Alex, is laughing because I talked to them about this last night. I'm like, I can't believe this, because Georgia had 2 injury timeouts during that final drive that basically allowed Ohio State to save their timeouts. There were 2 times where they didn't have to use a timeout. And then Stroud, their great quarterback, has this fabulous run right down the middle of the field and gets them to the 30-yard line.
30-yard line.
And they're basically 1st and 10 at the 30-yard line with, like, I don't remember the exact seconds, but it was 18 seconds, 19 seconds, full 20 seconds, whatever. They had time left and 2 timeouts. You have 3 plays to advance the ball from the 30-yard line, get it closer.
And all you need is a field goal.
And all you need is a field goal. And they end up losing 2 yards in those 3 plays and waste both their timeouts. And then he kicks a field goal that's a 50-yarder, and that's a field goal that even a good kicker is probably only going to hit 6 out of 10, and that's a really good field goal.
Oh, if
kicker.
that, yeah, I was going to say if that,
yeah. So anyway, I just again Ohio State's coaching during down the stretch.
I was going to say, obviously tremendous program, and I think they showed it by the way they played Georgia. But I think Ryan Day has also shown some chinks in the armor with his coaching decisions and some of the things that he's done during games. Not just he's a great recruiter. I think he's a great overall coach. They've got a great program. But I've seen a few things that have popped up that said, okay, he doesn't have all the answers either.
No.
Yep, that's true. And I was struck by, like you said, how easy Ohio State was able to score on Georgia's very good defense in certain situations. They gave up their own pick 6 early on in the game, and had a 14-point lead going into the fourth quarter, which I remember Dan and I said, Ohio State was on a drive and they got a field goal instead of a touchdown, which meant they had the 14-point lead instead of a 17-point lead. And we said 14 points isn't enough. You needed the 17 to make it a 3-score game for Georgia, and that turned out to be true.
Yep.
And they had their own interesting situations where they had opportunities to get more points or make Georgia lose points, such as the targeting that got called back that would have made Georgia kick a field goal instead of getting a touchdown, or the gutsy go for it on 4th down fake punt scenario that Ryan Day drew up that then got called back because of the timeout.
12 guys. There was a 12th guy on the field.
But it was because of the timeout.
Okay.
Yep.
The Georgia guy called the timeout.
Oh, that's right.
But it turns out there were 12 men on the field, so it may have been called back regardless. The point being, Ohio State had plenty of chances. It was another exciting back and forth kind of game. We were disappointed because we wanted the SEC to lose, of course.
Absolutely, yeah.
So, a bit bummed that it didn't turn out that way, but it was cool. I had the game up on my laptop, and we had the New Year's ball drop on the big TV, and it timed up almost perfectly with the field goal.
Right.
Love it.
It was funny.
Yeah.
Well, the irony of the whole thing was of yesterday's games, you figured, okay, the 2 defensive teams, Georgia, Michigan, they'll just make these games kind of their own, just bully ball and just do what they expect, and the other 2 teams will fold, and that'll be the end of it. Now, the 2 teams with the supposed good defenses got lit up, and the irony now is that as I look at Georgia, even though they won the game, TCU is the kind of team that can give them trouble, given the fact that in the last 2, Georgia's not played particularly well against wide open offenses. So if they can't figure out a way to tighten up their pass defense, TCU's got a shot.
Yeah, no, well, and that transitions us nicely into talk about the new national championship game, which will be TCU Georgia. And I agree with you. I think I saw that the opening line was had them as a 14-point underdog.
Ooh.
That's huge. Vegas clearly doesn't think highly of that particular matchup, and I saw Stetson Bennett, Georgia's quarterback, saying in the locker room, I played so bad that game, I can't believe that we won, So I think it will serve as a wake-up call to Georgia,
right.
We need to be on our toes. This TCU team is clearly good. They just proved it against Michigan, so I think they'll come more focused, but at the same time, they did lose quite a few number of players to injury. I don't know how major any of them were, and TCU lost their running back, which is significant.
Our running back, yeah.
But then again, in this game, Ohio State got 348 passing yards on them and only 119 rushing. So, TCU's strength is passing, and that's what Ohio State was able to use against Georgia. So I agree with you. I think, although if I was a betting man, I would still favor Georgia in terms of who's going to win. I think TCU can keep it interesting and might be able to pull off the Cinderella run.
See, here's my thing. I think Georgia beats Ohio State comfortably if they have the right game plan. I'm going to go to the coaching staffs. And,
agreed.
And
both
much
cases.
And much like you said with Michigan's, they had too damn much time to to game plan.
Game plan. Yep.
And they overthink it, right? And now this time they only have a week, so it's almost normal game week kind of process, right? So they won't do that. And in fact, I bet you they're going to, when they review the breakdown of the film, they're going to say, why didn't we run it more? Because they were running oftentimes at will against Ohio State. I mean, it was when they would run, they were getting chunks. And they would do that, and then they would throw it 3 times. And it just it would just drive me nuts. I'm like, what are you doing, Georgia? You've got Ohio State on their heels, and then it's 1st and 10, and you throw it. And I get that you want to be balanced and you want to do what they're not expecting and all that sort of stuff. But I'm a big believer in, if you got them on their heels, that's the best time to do it again. That's the best time to go right at the same exact player, the same exact spot, and get him doubting his manhood. I mean, just totally destroy this guy, okay? And then guess what? He's done. Like, the entire game, you got his number. And then your offensive lineman can start, jiving with him, talking with him, and getting in his head even worse.
Well, clearly the 2 favorites in both cases, Pete, they allowed the underdog to dictate the game. And that's where it got away from both schools, both programs.
Right.
Georgia, fortunately, was able to recover. We tried and couldn't do it.
Right.
But very similar in what happened, in that those games should have been 35-14, 35-21 victories for Georgia and Michigan by just pounding the ball. And neither school chose to do it.
I totally agree. Totally agree. And so, my contention is Georgia's going to have that discipline because they don't have they don't have time to overthink it. They're going to look at this film with Ohio State and realize their mistake, and they're going to have a very ground-based attack against TCU. And I think TCU is going to need to have some things happen in their favor early on, like what happened in the Michigan game. TCU is going to have some easy points like a pick six, those kinds of things that lead to positive momentum and pressure on Georgia. Otherwise, I think Georgia just kind of grinds this thing out. It'll probably end up being, like you said, a 35-17 type of game. But then maybe late, Georgia will start to just, because a lot of times these championship games, once the outcome is kind of decided, the team that's losing kind of just loses it, and then the other team just blows them away. So my guess is going to be that's why the Vegas folks have got a 14-point. That's a big before the game margin.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Your best defense against these kind of teams too is keeping the offense off the field.
Exactly.
So if your offense can take up clock, I mean, I think this may be the first game, maybe the second game. We might not have won the time of possession against Purdue, but in most cases we were almost 2-1 time of possession. So our defense is looking like they're really good. Fact is, they're not playing much, you can't score on them if they're not on the field.
Interestingly, in the Georgia game, they ran it 26 times and averaged 5.2 yards. So to your point, when they did run it, they were having success, although then they got almost 400 yards passing it. So that was working out pretty well for them too. I will say something in TCU's favor is that Michigan and Georgia are pretty similar teams in a lot of ways, in that they're both have very good defenses, focus more on the running game, but also have a good passing game and things like that. So TCU, obviously, they need to change up the game plan because Georgia will look at the film of the Michigan game to see what they were doing. But I think, their players are already kind of in that mindset, to do similar things. And they were able to, really frustrate the running game of Michigan. So I think it'll be key that they're able to do that against Georgia. And if they can, I think they've got a chance to win.
Okay. You know what? I hope you're right. It's not going to be what my guess is going to be, but I hope you're right, because what that would mean is that would be 2 games in a row where this 3-3-5 defense, which is the defensive concept that is the history of our new defensive coordinator, clearly created some confusion and is not something that you see every day in the Big Ten or, for that matter, in the SEC. The 3-3-5 is more popular in the Big 12 and the Pac-12, and I think there's some ACC schools like Syracuse that were using it. So
Well, it's apparent that it must confuse coaches because they do a double reverse, a tight end pass attempt at the goal line. So clearly, it is very confusing.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
That's funny.
So, getting to predictions then, I'm going to, because actually Dad and I are currently tied with 4 guesses correct between the two of us for the bowl games so far, and the ones that are happening tomorrow on Monday were the same on. We predicted the same teams would win. So, we need a tiebreaker. So, I'm going to predict that TCU is going to win.
Oh, wow.
In a narrow victory against Georgia. And it'll probably be higher scoring because these semifinals both were. So I'll say that Georgia wins. Let's say
you said TCU.
TCU.
I'm sorry.
TCU wins.
TCU wins 42-41 over Georgia in a 1-point game.
Wow. Gutsy call. I'm going to say
that is a gutsy call.
I'm going to say that Georgia wins. I think it's going to be. I'm going to say 42-24 for TCU.
All right. What about you, Brian?
I'm going to join you, Pete. I'm going to say 42, but I'm going to give TCU 28 points.
Okay.
And but I think Alex, he's got a wild card there, and he might just pull it out. Because that's a quirky team,
It is.
And sometimes there's just a team of destiny.
Right.
Yeah, and the ironic thing, and I don't want to get too far off subject here, but they were showing the differential between the student
Population.
enrollment
population
of TCU and Michigan. I mean, these are two very, very different schools, with the standpoint of finances and everything else.
Right.
And somehow TCU's put this together. It's impressive.
Yep.
There's no doubt, and that's part of what's exciting about the future 12-team playoff, right?
Absolutely.
You might get a team that's 12th or 11th, that won their conference, but they're not considered very good, in the global sense or whatever. But they could go on a run in the postseason like you see in other sports.
And then the other thing with the playoff is late season injuries are going to become way more of a factor, right? Because now it's not just a one and done kind of deal like they have now, or 2 and done, I guess. It's going to become, for some teams, 4, right? Like you're going to play the first round, then you got to play the second round, then you got to play the third round, right? And then a championship.
That's a lot.
That's a lot of games.
Well, and an injury in football can be an enormous thing to overcome. Not crying spilled milk or anything or whining, but Blake Corum probably would have gotten us one of those touchdowns at the goal line yesterday. Would it have been enough? Maybe, maybe not. But that one player was critical, and all those teams are losing critical players. It's not just Michigan.
Right.
TCU lost a critical running back yesterday. So it's going to be tough to maintain health over that extended duration of playing.
And not to mention, not just playing, podunk playing the best teams in the country.
Right, exactly.
Exactly.
Yep.
Game after game. Yes.
So if an under estimated team, a team that was 10th out of the 12 or whatever, wins that first game, builds some momentum, avoids major injury, and then faces another team that maybe had some accumulated injuries and was higher in the pecking order, but really wasn't anymore because they had lost a player of significance. All of a sudden they win that one, and now they're in the Final Four, and then it's anybody's game, right? So, I could see that kind of stuff happening. Those first couple of rounds are going to be exciting.
Yeah. All right, and to wrap things up here, I'm going to end on 2 notes of positivity. I know it's a gloomy day for you, Brian, but on the positive side of things,
it's a traditional day after New Year's. New Year's Eve.
Traditional Michigan experience.
I'm well practiced at this.
These, objectively speaking, this is the best semifinal in the entire history of the 14 playoff, because we've had years where one of the games was good and one was kind of a blowout. So in terms of both games being entertaining to the end, this was the best we've had so far. Yep. And it shows that there's more parity in college football than I think a lot of people would have said before, because we saw both Big Ten teams be very competitive against the teams they're playing against, including the champion of the SEC. And we saw that the Big 12 champion was very good, better than people expected, had a very strong defense, subverting some expectations there. So I think it's a sign of health for college football in a certain sense.
That's true. I agree. The parity and the balance seems to be much, much more evenly spread. And I think it's also interesting to see different styles of play around the country and how they relate to that matchup, whether it's a semifinal or final.
Yep, very true. So we'll have to see how the championship game goes. I'm hoping we're here talking about the SEC losing next week, but we'll see. You're welcome to join us in the future, Brian. It's always fun having you on the show.
It's been great fun, guys.
Good.
Great. The fans out there can email us at huskerpete13@gmail.com. You can also reach out to us on Spotify or Apple Podcasts. Subscribe to us there. Leave us ratings or reviews. We always love hearing from the fans. We'll read comments out on the air. So thank you for joining me, Dad, for this fun Christmas weekend. And thank you,
great,
Brian, for joining us for this special episode.
Thank you, guys. Enjoyed it.
And until next time, go Big Red.
Go Big Red.